Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're gonna be reviewing Inget, nytt, solen by the band Kaipa.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
Oh, Kaipa. I've seen reviews of them on Scott's channel over on the Prog Corner and on Notes Reviews channel as well, and I don't know, I've just been interested about them, and when I saw that today we're going to be listening to them, I was definitely quite excited. So anyway, here's some of my favorite bits from this album.
Så talar de om jämlikhet.
So I have a bit of a problem with today's review because I'm not entirely sure what I'm gonna talk about. You see, usually when I make these reviews, I don't want to just give you the information and backstory about the album and no more than that. I want to add some interesting point about the music, about the band, about anything that does with anything that has to do with anything basically. And for this one, the obvious choice would to just, talk about Swedish prog. But the thing is, I already did it with yesterday's episode and it's kind of just too fresh in my mind to do it yet again. So unfortunately, I don't entirely know what I'm going to talk about in this one, but I'll just keep on rambling on and hopefully something will arise. So Kaipa are a Swedish prog band and they formed back in 1973 and originally they were called Ura Kaipa. Now, while as I mentioned many times in the past, the Swedish progressive rock scene has skyrocketed basically after the decline of prog in the late 70s. In the 70s themselves, Sweden wasn't known as the capital of prog or anything, and Kaipa, well, they weren't that well of a known band outside of Sweden as well. You see, success didn't come right away for this band. When they released their debut self-titled album in 1975, it was good and people did appreciate it, but mostly in Sweden. They weren't that known anywhere else in the world, and thus they had to better themselves, and in 1976 they released their second album, the album that we're reviewing today, called Inget, nytt, solen, which means nothing new under the sun, and this album proved to be a better success on a more international scale. Now, this might sound a bit odd for you guys, but this quote, "nothing new under the sun," it's one of my favorite quotes ever, and I say it a lot, more than I'd care to admit. And you're asking yourself maybe, quote, this is a quote? Yes, this is actually a quote, and it comes from the Bible and from the Book of Ecclesiastes. And it was said by no other than King Solomon himself. Now, I myself am not a religious person in any way, but I am quite familiar with a lot of passages and books from the Bible because I've had to study them in school, and I distinctly remember, despite being kind of bored about anything that has to do with Bible lessons, I do remember that the Book of Ecclesiastes was one of very much utter importance to me. And this book basically is some sort of a diary, a journal written by King Solomon himself, and he describes his very macabre and very realistic outlook on life itself. He basically details how every day just goes on and there's day by day and nothing really changes, and he's getting older and life isn't as good as many would like to portray it, and he sums it all up with a great sentence that is as such: what has been will be again, what has been done will be done again, there is nothing new Under the Sun. Now, let me dwell a bit into my past here. I'm not gonna shy away from this, and I will tell you all that in the past, especially around about 6, 5, 7, 8 years ago, I was struggling with depression, okay? It was very hard. It was very much a hard time for me. And I remember getting acquainted with this quote probably back in the midst of depression, where every single day just didn't really seem like it had any meaning to it. Everything was pretty much meaningless. And I read this one, and in some way it kind of made me feel like I wasn't alone. Even in a text written more than 2,000 years ago, I felt like someone else was understanding what I felt as well. And it really resonated with me, and I say this a lot up until today because it kind of has a nostalgic value to me in some way. I don't look back at it and get sad. I look back at it and just think of the fact that I'm in a different place right now, and I'm happy for it. I really am. And yeah, I'm sorry, I said that I didn't know what I was going to talk about in this video, and look where we've ended up being. So yeah, anyway, getting back on topic, Kaipa were a band which basically succeeded as well as they flopped. So while they did gain notoriety with their first 3 albums, after guitarist Ronnie Stolt left in order to form the Flower Kings, and after releasing 2 abysmal albums in the 80s, these guys have formally disbanded in 1982, and that was the thing for a while until Kaipa suddenly re-emerged back in the year of 2000, and since then they've been releasing albums like madmen. But let's take a few steps back and go back to 1976 with the release of this album called Nothing New Under the Sun, which takes a lot of inspiration from all the greats of prog in the early 70s for sure. Now, I've seen one reviewer refer to this one as the Swedish answer for Genesis's Supper's Ready, and honestly I couldn't agree more. While you can trace some King Crimson, yes, and even slightly a bit of ELP in the mix, it is undoubtable that the main inspiration for this album and the band at the time was definitely the music of Genesis, with some of the tracks on here being basically taken straight out of albums like Selling England by the Pound or even Foxtrot, of course without the English lyrics but instead with the Swedish ones. But let's not delay it any further and let's talk about the opening epic for this album called Inget bedrar, which means it's not what it seems. If you're the type of person that really likes the long epics of the early 70s like Thick as a Brick or Supper's Ready or Close to the Edge, this one will definitely be up your alley. And this long track is divided down to 5 subsections, with those being Awakening, Bitterness, Hopefulness, Powerfulness, and Misled. And each and every one of them has their own distinct characteristics, and they all feature a very interesting composition and when put together make up for this great one piece. And even if you don't understand a single word being sung on here, you can feel that there is a narrative, a strong one going on here. And while I would have loved an English version for this one to shamelessly sing along to in the shower, I am pretty much fine with this one as it is as well. Now, hearing this particular epic, I can immediately understand the influences that Ronnie Stoltz came in when he formed the Flower Kings, and while I do believe that his execution of these influences on there was lesser to what's to be found on this album, I still do get this kind of insight. And well, Kaipa, they made this epic, and for me at least it is counted right now as one of the great epics of the 70s from progressive music, which I will probably cherish from now on forever. My personal favorite subsection in this one has to be Hopefulness, which has an amazing keyboard section as a whole, but as I said, all of these 5 sections put together just make up something that is more than to be imagined, and I love it so much. I do think that this song is basically flawless. It doesn't falter for a single moment, it makes for one cohesive piece, and I'm enjoying every single sense of it, and thus I would call this one a perfect song and definitely my favorite from the album. But slightly unfortunately, Kaipa were never quite able to reach this height again in this album, with the next 5 tracks to be found on the B-side for this one being very good, even great if I might add. bad, but not as close to the greatness of the first one. But nevertheless, what does the rest of this album have to offer? So I would call 3 out of the 5 remaining tracks to be some sort of transitional slash filler pieces on here. That is not to say that they're bad songs as anything. They're very good, they're very well crafted, but the ones that have some substance to them would be the title track at the end and the track Crusade. I do believe that Crusade is the stronger of the 2 main pieces on this side as a whole, and this one feels like it was straight out of Selling England by the Pound by Genesis. It sounds exactly what you'd expect of it, and honestly it's really good, but as I said, it's not perfect, it's not quite there. I do feel like the title track that closes this album off would have been my favorite track from this side in particular, but for some reason after listening to the 2 side by side a few times, I can tell you all that I do believe that Crusade is just slightly better, but again, the last track, the title track, Nothing New Under the Sun, is also really good. It has a deep squire bass to it and a lot of Yes as well as Genesis influences on it, and it's really fun. But because I listened to this album today, I honestly just can't get the epic, the first track out of my head, so recognizing and understanding the amazingness of the rest of the tracks on this album is quite hard on me for this moment. So as a conclusion, I don't know if Kaipa today are making the same type of music as they made in the past, seeing as their lineup is almost entirely different with only 1 original member still playing with the band nowadays, but maybe, I don't know, maybe it has some hints of it. Anyway, I'd love to get to know more of their music from their earlier days and from their reincarnation as well. But for now, as I am very much pleased with what I've heard, let's talk a bit about this album's cover. So surprisingly, when I looked at this cover for the first time, the first thing I noticed wasn't everything that's going on it, but rather the logo for the band itself. With its very interesting navy blue color, it is definitely a matter of talk, at least for like a paragraph or 2. You see, this logo, it isn't that good in my opinion. I do think that it's made kind of expertly and it has a very interesting silhouette to it, but it just kind of doesn't look good. And I do like the amazing makeover that they did for the band's logo in their reincarnation, which now looks a whole lot more recognizable and more understandable. But as it stands, it is kind of an interesting logo that I'm more than glad that they got rid of. But anyway, let's address the astronaut in the room. So this cover features a very interesting image on it because you have a set of 2 astronauts going on a lunar rover. But the thing is, they're not on the moon, they are actually on Earth, and you can tell that by looking in the background and seeing some trees, which makes this a very interesting interpretation of the cover. Now at first sight I kind of just didn't notice the trees. I was looking at it in like a small form or afar, and I didn't notice that we were going on Earth here, and thus I imagined myself that this was supposed to depict Mars. But now looking at it, I start realizing my wrong seeing. So I wouldn't call this album cover beautiful in any way, and I don't think that it's that pleasing aesthetically because it's kind of overcrowded at the same time, and as well I don't believe that it very much holds any connection to the music to be found on here as well, unless I just don't know the lyrics and it talks everything about lunar rovers and planet Earth basically. But as it stands, it is a cool cover, just maybe a bit unrelated to the music it's representing. So by just making a very clear average of everything to be found on this one, I will give this album a brilliant rating of 9 out of 10. But that's about it guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're gonna be listening to Starless and Bible Black by King Crimson. Oh my god, it has been long since we visited these guys and I am well anticipating this album as a whole. But that's about it guys. I want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Claywano, Wrist of Kings and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are just the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it guys. Have a wonderful day and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye guys.